The storm screamed like a living beast, its claws of ice raking across my fragile windows. But the knock at my door struck harder than the wind. My breath caught in my throat, frozen mid-air, as the echo reverberated through my empty house. That sound didn't belong to the storm. It belonged to fate. And I knew, deep inside, that if I opened that door, my life would never again belong only to me. The blizzard outside howled as though the earth itself was unraveling. For years, my house had been nothing but a cage of solitude, its peeling wallpaper and creaking beams my only companions. Nights stretched long and heavy, filled with silence too loud to ignore. I had taught myself to live with loneliness, to accept that nothing unexpected would ever breach the stillness of these walls. But that night, when the first knock came, sharp and pleading, my world shifted. I froze in place, the chipped mug in my hand slipping slightly, spilling lukewarm tea across my palm. No one visited me. Not here. Not in the middle of nowhere, where the road wound like a forgotten scar across the landscape. My heart stuttered, panic and curiosity colliding as another knock followed. Louder, more insistent. It was not the storm's rhythm. It was human. For a moment, I imagined the worst. A criminal, a thief, someone who knew how vulnerable I was. My chest tightened at the thought of opening that door and finding danger standing there, ready to consume me. Yet another thought whispered, equally terrifying. What if I left them out there to die? The storm was merciless, swallowing everything in white. What kind of person would I be to ignore a cry for shelter? With trembling fingers, I reached for the latch. My knuckles brushed the cold wood, rough with years of neglect. The hinges groaned when I pulled, and the door cracked open. A rush of frozen air tore through the entryway, biting at my skin. And then I saw him. He stood like a ghost, carved from the storm. His coat soaked through, dark hair plastered to his forehead, icicles clinging to his collar. His lips were blue, his hands shaking violently. Yet even in his ruined state, something about him radiated strength. His eyes, wide and desperate, locked on mine with a silent plea. For one long heartbeat, I nearly closed the door. But I couldn't. "Come in," I whispered, stepping aside. He staggered past me, dripping snow onto the worn floorboards, and collapsed into the armchair that sagged under his weight. The room, shabby and dimly lit, seemed to shrink around his presence. My peeling wallpaper, the flickering lamp, the stacks of unpaid bills on the table, every flaw felt magnified under his gaze. Yet he looked at none of it. His shoulders rose and fell with ragged breaths, as though my little home had become his only refuge. I hurried to the kitchen, fumbling with the old teapot. Steam hissed as I poured boiling water over cheap tea leaves, my hands trembling, not just from the chill, but from the gravity of what had just happened. Carrying the mismatched cups, one floral, one plain white, I returned to him. He accepted the cup with both hands, pressing it to his lips as though it might restore his very soul. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough, threaded with exhaustion. I nodded, uneasy. "You scared me," I admitted softly. His eyes lifted, dark and unreadable. "I had nowhere else to go. Something told me I'd be safe here." The words struck me harder than the storm. Why here? Why me? I said nothing, but suspicion coiled tightly in my chest. We spoke in fragments. My name, his vague confession that he only needed shelter. But every detail contradicted his story. His coat, though battered by the storm, was not ordinary. Its stitching spoke of wealth. His shoes, ruined by ice, were crafted from leather I could never afford. Even his voice, low, steady beneath the exhaustion, sounded like a man used to command, not begging. When I leaned forward to refill his cup, my elbow knocked my own. Tea spilled across the table, seeping into my sketches. My face burned with embarrassment, but before I could move, he was there, swift, precise, pressing a napkin to the mess. Our fingers brushed, his skin warm despite the cold that clung to him, and a spark jolted through me, sharp as lightning in the night. We froze, caught in the silence that followed. His gaze drifted to my scattered drawings, arches, domes, palaces I had sketched by candlelight. For a moment, curiosity flickered in his expression, as if he recognized something more than amateur dreams. I swallowed hard, wishing I could hide them, but it was too late. Outside, the storm battered the windows, demanding to be heard. Inside, the air thickened with unspoken questions. Who was this man? Why had fate driven him to my door? And what secrets weighed on him so heavily that he sought refuge in a stranger's house? As he lifted his cup again, the firelight caught on his hand. My breath hitched. There, gleaming against his skin, was a heavy golden signet ring. Its emblem shimmered with a crest I didn't recognize, but instinct screamed that it was no ordinary trinket. That ring was power. That ring was legacy. The storm outside wailed louder, but its fury faded compared to the realization dawning inside me. This was no lost traveler. This was a man with secrets far larger than my world. And I knew, with terrifying clarity, that his next words could shatter everything I thought I knew about this night. And about myself. Steam curled between us, veiling his face in a ghostly haze. Every sip he took seemed to hide more than it revealed, as though the tea itself carried secrets too heavy to speak aloud. I realized then, this was not a conversation. This was a test. The storm outside howled against the roof, but inside, the silence pressed heavier than the snow. I clutched my chipped cup, its warmth seeping into my cold fingers as I watched him across the table. The man who had knocked on my door was no longer trembling like a lost wanderer. He sat straighter now, calmer, though exhaustion still clung to him. His dark eyes lingered on me with unnerving intensity, as though he were memorizing every detail of my face. Finally, he set his cup down with deliberate care. "Ava," he said, his voice low but clear, shaping my name like it mattered. "And you design buildings?" My breath caught. His gaze had fallen on the scattered sketches beside him. Dreams of arches, moonlit terraces, and gardens I had drawn by candlelight when sleep refused to come. Embarrassment burned my cheeks. I wanted to brush them aside, to insist they were nothing more than childish fantasies. But the weight in his tone held me still. "I dream of places where people feel safe," I admitted quietly, surprising myself with the honesty in my voice. "Sanctuaries that remind us beauty still exists, even when the world feels broken." He studied me for a long moment, his silence louder than the storm outside. Then, with a faint nod, he leaned back, the flicker of the lamp casting shadows across his features. His calm unsettled me more than his desperation had. A man with secrets does not hide them in silence. He hides them in plain sight. I tried to steady my hands as I slid my sketchbook closer. "Here," I said softly. "If you're running from something, maybe you should sketch too. Sometimes, it's easier to draw what we can't say." For a heartbeat, I thought he would refuse. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a pen. His grip was steady, his movements precise, as he bent over the page. Lines flowed with confidence, strokes sure and practiced. He was not simply doodling, he was building. Within minutes, cathedrals rose from the paper, arches soared, gardens unfolded with deliberate grace. I watched, spellbound. This man was no stranger to creation. He had the hands of someone who had shaped worlds before. When he finally set the pen down, he looked at me, not with arrogance, but with something deeper. "Your dreams are brave," he murmured. "Most people fear reaching for something so grand." The praise struck me harder than any insult could have. My throat tightened, and I lowered my gaze. "Comfort feels like a dream I can't afford," I whispered. His expression softened, compassion shadowing his dark eyes. "Tonight you can afford both," he said gently. "Warmth and safety, even if only for a moment." Before I could reply, The vibration of a phone cut through the quiet. The sound was faint, discreet, but enough to shatter the fragile peace. He glanced at the device, no name flashing on the screen, and silenced it with a swift motion. He did not hesitate. He did not explain. He simply turned back to the steam between us, as if the outside world could not touch him here. "They can wait," he said firmly. A chill rippled through me. Whoever they were, they mattered. And yet, here he was, choosing to stay in my modest home with mismatched cups and chipped plates. The thought made my chest tighten with something dangerously close to hope. He rose slowly, his shadow stretching across the wall as the lamp flickered. "Thank you," he said, voice thick with something unspoken. "For tea. For this space." I stood too, drawn to the weight of his presence, my heart pounding with questions I dared not ask. "Stay," I whispered. "This house may be small, but it's yours tonight." He studied me, his gaze unreadable before reaching into his pocket. When he withdrew his hand, something gleamed in the firelight. A signet ring, the same I had glimpsed before. Only this time, he slid it gently onto my finger. Cold metal kissed my skin, and a tremor raced up my arm. "A token," he murmured. "So you'll know this moment was real." The ring's weight pressed heavily against my hand, far heavier than gold should. I looked up, but his expression had darkened, his features shadowed by the storm's fury outside. "They can't know I'm here," he whispered, voice breaking with regret. The wind slammed against the windows, rattling them like a warning, and in that moment, staring at the ring that now bound me to his secret, I realized the truth. Whatever world this man came from, I was now entangled in it. And soon, his revelation would change everything. His next words landed sharper than the storm's icicles. "I'm not who you think I am." In that instant, the room shifted. The hearth's glow flickered weaker, the shadows lengthened, and the man I had offered tea to no longer seemed like a weary traveler. He was something else, someone carrying a weight I could barely imagine. The wind screamed beyond the windows, but my attention was fixed on the man across from me. He sat straighter now, his exhaustion tempered by something stronger. The ragged coat I had pitied only moments ago seemed suddenly deceptive. Even ruined by the blizzard, it bore the unmistakable cut of luxury. My gaze dropped lower, to the cufflink at his wrist. Not ordinary metal, but polished gold engraved with a crowned lion. My chest tightened. That symbol was no accident. It belonged to power, to lineage, to wealth I had only heard of in whispers. He caught my staring and didn't flinch. "I wasn't running from the cold," he said slowly, voice thick with the weight of confession. "I was running from everything else." I clutched my teacup tighter, its chipped rim cutting against my fingers. "Everything else?" I echoed, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted the answer. His eyes, dark, steady, met mine. Boardrooms, decisions, eyes that watch every move I make. I wanted one night where I wasn't a title, where I wasn't him. My pulse quickened. Him. He leaned back, running a hand across his face as though peeling off a mask. "James Carter," he whispered at last. The name hit me like thunder. Carter Industries, the empire that built skylines, reshaped cities, and commanded economies. I had heard it spoken in news reports, in gossip at cafes, in the awe of my architecture professors. Carter Industries was not just a company, it was a kingdom. And here sat its king, disguised as a lost soul in my modest home. My breath caught as my mind reeled. You run Carter Industries?" "I am Carter Industries," he said quietly. "At least that's what they all believe. But tonight, I just wanted to be James." The words broke something inside me. The man sipping tea from my chipped cup was not the anonymous wanderer I thought he was, but a titan whose signature could decide the fate of thousands. And yet, here he was, vulnerable, seeking refuge in the smallest house on the street. I wanted to recoil, to demand why he had come to my door of all places. But instead I found myself whispering, "And why here? Why me?" He looked at me then, truly looked, his gaze softer, stripped of command. "Because you didn't see the CEO. You saw a man in need. That's something I don't get anymore." The vulnerability in his tone pulled at something deep in my chest. I had been invisible for so long, overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. Yet here he was, claiming he had come because I had looked at him without expectation. The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the furnace. My mind raced with questions I couldn't voice. His world was unimaginable to me. Marble offices, luxury jets, gala banquets. Mine was late rent, second-hand furniture, and sketchbooks filled with dreams too fragile to show the world. Could two such lives ever collide without breaking one of them? As if sensing my turmoil, he leaned forward, his hand brushing against mine. "Ava," he said, my name grounding me in the moment. "Tonight let me just be James, not Carter, not CEO, just me." The sincerity in his voice cracked through the storm inside me. My throat tightened, and I nodded slowly. "Then you're James," I whispered back. But even as I said it, reality pressed in. His phone buzzed again, muffled in his pocket, demanding his return to the Empire waiting outside my door. He silenced it quickly, but the look in his eyes betrayed the truth. His world would not wait for long. "I have to go back," he murmured, his voice breaking like ice under pressure. "But I don't want to." My chest clenched at the conflict in his tone. He rose, his shadow stretching tall against my walls, the storm's light flickering around him like a crown of fire. I stood too, reaching instinctively for his hand. "Stay until the storm passes," I pleaded softly. "Be James a little longer." Our eyes locked, and for a heartbeat, he seemed torn between the kingdom outside and the fragile humanity inside this room. He squeezed my hand, his warmth anchoring me, and I felt something terrifying. Hope. Then his gaze fell to his wrist. The gold watch gleamed in the firelight, its face engraved with the Carter crest. He stared at it as though it were shackles, not treasure. "I have to return to my world," he whispered, his voice caught between regret and resolve. My heart clenched. I knew the moment he stepped back into that empire, the man I had seen tonight would vanish. The storm outside thundered like an omen as his fingers closed around the doorknob. And I realized I had to choose. Let him leave, or step into the world of ice and gold with him. One buzz of his phone, and the humble man I thought I knew vanished. In his place stood a figure of command, posture rigid, voice sharp as steel. It was as if the storm outside had torn away the mask, revealing not a stranger in need, but a titan of power. I had just finished describing my dream of a rooftop gallery bathed in moonlight when his phone lit up again. The glow on his face sharpened his features, turning softness into hard lines. He glanced at the screen, and I saw his jaw tighten, the faintest flicker of irritation crossing his expression. Then, with a swift motion, he rose to his feet. The chair scraped sharply against the wooden floor, a sound that made me flinch. Gone was the weary traveler sipping tea in my threadbare armchair. What stood before me now was a man accustomed to command. His shoulders squared, his voice clipped and precise as he spoke into the device. "Send the revised blueprints. Confirm the contractors. No delays. No excuses." I stared, my chest constricting. His tone was nothing like the gentle gratitude he had shown me minutes before. This was the voice of someone who moved mountains with a word, who expected obedience without question. I suddenly felt very small in my own home, dwarfed by the presence of a man who carried empires in his palm. The lamplight caught the crisp lines of his tailored suit beneath the ruined coat, details I had overlooked before. Navy wool, bespoke stitching, clothes never meant for the anonymity of a storm. They were made for boardrooms, for negotiations, for power. Everything about him, even now, screamed control. "James," I whispered, my voice trembling. He did not answer at first. His eyes remained fixed on the glowing screen, his thumb tapping out messages with unrelenting focus. The intimacy of our tea, our shared silences. It was gone, replaced by the cold efficiency of a man too important to pause. When he finally slipped the phone back into his coat, his words were measured, deliberate. "Ava, I have responsibilities," he said firmly. "In my world, hesitation is a luxury I cannot afford." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "I understand," I murmured, though the words felt small, fragile against the weight of his authority. For a moment, his gaze swept over me. My rumpled sweater, the ink-stained fingers from sketching, the mismatched furniture that filled my little living room. I felt exposed, laid bare under the scrutiny of a man who had seen palaces rise and cities bend to his will. My heart pounded, urging me to retreat. Yet something deeper rooted me to the floor. Then, just as suddenly as the mask had slipped, his posture softened. He exhaled heavily, as though shedding layers of armor. "Do you know why I came here tonight?" he asked quietly. It wasn't to escape the cold. It was to remember why I started building at all. His voice cracked, vulnerability seeping through. Not for profit, not for glass towers, but for moments like this, when someone reminds me creation begins with compassion. The shift in his tone left me stunned. He stepped closer, the firelight catching on the crest engraved in his cufflinks. "I want you to see what I see," he said. Reaching into his coat, he withdrew a thick envelope and placed it on the table before me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside lay an embossed invitation, its silver lettering shimmering in the glow, an address I recognized instantly: Carter Industries headquarters. My heart lurched. This was no casual gesture. It was an invitation to step into his world, not as an outsider, but as something more. Tears pricked my eyes as I looked up at him. "Why? Why me?" I whispered. His gaze softened, his thumb brushing across my knuckles as he spoke. "Because you dared to dream when no one else was looking. Because you opened your door." The sincerity in his words pressed against the doubt coiled in my chest. My mind raced, torn between fear and exhilaration. This man, this stranger-turned titan, was offering me a place beside him. A place in a world I had only ever glimpsed through news headlines and my own imagination. He leaned closer, his breath warm against the hush of the storm. "I could give you everything," he whispered, "if you'll trust me." The room fell utterly silent, the storm's roar outside fading to nothing. I clutched the silver invitation, its weight anchoring me to the precipice of a choice that could change everything. His hand extended toward me, steady, waiting. And as the fire flickered, casting his shadow tall against my walls, I realized the truth. Stepping into his world meant leaving my own behind. The question burned inside me. Was trust worth the cost? My heart skipped as he slid a sleek black card across the table, its silver crest gleaming in the lamplight. The logo was unmistakable: Carter Industries. His voice dropped to a whisper, heavy with promise. "Tell me your vision of a palace." The card sat between us like a portal, its embossed letters shimmering with more weight than gold. I traced its edge with trembling fingers, unable to reconcile the two worlds colliding before me. My chipped teacups, my threadbare sweater, and the man across from me offering a doorway into a kingdom of wealth and power. "A palace," I echoed, the word foreign on my tongue, both fragile and intoxicating. His eyes locked onto mine, unwavering. "Yes. Tell me what you see." I hesitated, breath shallow. For years, my sketches had been secrets, dreams scribbled in the margins of unpaid bills and late-night journals. No one had ever asked. But something about his gaze, intense yet patient, pulled the words out of me. "I imagine marble halls that glow with sunlight," I began slowly, my voice unsteady but gaining strength with each image. Ballrooms with ceilings so high they feel like the night sky itself. Secret gardens where fountains whisper under moonlight. Terraces that capture fireflies at dusk, and galleries where light and shadow dance like living art. As I spoke, I felt my chest loosen, my heart racing with the vulnerability of sharing what I had never dared to say aloud. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, his expression rapt. He was not just listening, he was absorbing, as though every word was fuel. "Show me," he murmured. My hands shook as I reached for my portfolio, worn leather creaking as I laid it on the table. The pages fluttered open, revealing sketches smudged with graphite and stains from countless cups of coffee. Renderings of terraces, arches, and statues I had conjured in the silence of long nights spilled across the surface. He turned each page slowly, reverently, as though handling ancient relics. When he stopped at a watercolor of a moonlit terrace surrounded by firefly-lit gardens, his lips curved into a slow smile. "Exquisite," he breathed. "You understand balance, light and shadow, wonder and reality. Few people ever see the world this way." The praise hit me like a shockwave. My throat tightened, tears threatening. All my life I had been invisible, my talent dismissed as childish fantasy. Yet here was the most powerful man I had ever met, holding my dream as though it were treasure. "You want people to feel something," he continued, "not just to see stone and glass. You want them to believe in beauty again." I swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, that's all I've ever wanted." He closed the portfolio gently, then slid the card back toward me. "Then let's build it." The words hung in the air like thunder. "What?" My voice cracked. "Your palace," he said firmly. "I'll fund it. I'll assemble the team, the resources, everything you need. You'll lead the design, Ava. Your vision, your creation, brought to life." My breath hitched, and I nearly laughed in disbelief. For a moment I thought it was a cruel joke, but his eyes held no humor, only unyielding resolve. He wasn't offering encouragement. He was making a promise. Panic and exhilaration collided inside me. I don't know if I can." "You can," he interrupted gently, his tone steady but sure. "I've waited years for someone with your imagination, someone unbound by convention, someone brave enough to dream bigger than boardrooms allow." I pressed my hands against the table to keep them from trembling. My world had always been small. Late rent, part-time shifts, candlelit sketches, and now he was offering me the chance to carve stone into monuments. I thought of my mother's words, scrawled in a letter I kept folded under my pillow. "Nothing worthwhile comes without risk." They had guided me through nights of doubt, and now they echoed louder than ever. I lifted my eyes to the frost-dusted window. Outside, the storm had softened, snowflakes drifting like whispers. Inside, the storm within me raged stronger than ever. Could I leave behind the safety of obscurity to step into a world where every mistake would be magnified? Finally, I exhaled, my voice trembling. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll design the palace." His smile brightened, transforming the room. He extended his hand across the table. I placed mine in his, and his grip was warm, firm, grounding me in a promise that was no longer a dream. "Welcome aboard," he said softly. "We begin at dawn." The mantel clock ticked midnight, its sound impossibly loud in the quiet. I clutched the card, its silver crest gleaming under the lamplight like a seal of destiny. He leaned closer, eyes burning with anticipation. "Meet me tomorrow at my estate. Let me show you what I can build." The words trembled between us like the first note of a symphony yet to be written. The storm outside had hushed, as though even nature waited for what came next. And deep inside, I knew there was no turning back. The invitation card burned in my hand, like both a blessing and a curse. One side whispered of palaces, grandeur, and dreams fulfilled. The other screamed of traps, chains, and a world I might never escape. My apartment walls closed in around me. too small to hold the storm inside my chest. I sat on the sagging edge of my couch, the silver card glowing faintly under the lamplight. Its embossed crest seemed alive, a symbol that pulsed with every beat of my frantic heart. Around me, the world was painfully familiar. Drafting table covered in coffee stains, unpaid bills stacked neatly in corners, the smell of leftover soup still lingering from dinner. And yet, in the palm of my hand, I held a key to another world entirely. One moment, I was Ava, the barista, sketching fantasies in the stolen hours between shifts. The next, I was Ava, the visionary, invited to craft palaces with the resources of an empire behind me. My chest tightened at the sheer absurdity of it. How could the two versions of myself coexist? I rose, pacing the narrow carpet until its fibers wore thin under my steps. What if I fail? I whispered to the silence. What if I'm not enough? The storm outside rattled the window panes in response. The winds howl eerily like laughter at my fear. I pressed the card against my chest and closed my eyes. Images flooded me, sunlight spilling across marble floors I had once painted in watercolor, moonlit gardens filled with the fragrance of jasmine and the flicker of fireflies. They felt so close, almost tangible. And yet, for every breathtaking vision, a shadow lingered. Contracts, obligations, ownership lost. My gaze shifted to the shelf above my bed, where small mementos of my old life gathered dust. A chipped teacup from my first café shift. A gallery ticket stub I could barely afford. My mother's letter, edges yellowed, her handwriting shaky but firm. Don't let fear chain you. If you have to risk everything for beauty, do it. I clenched the card tighter. Fear was loud, but her words were louder. I grabbed my coat from its hook by the door, slipping the card into my pocket as though it were a talisman. My steps echoed in the dim corridor of the building, each one steadier than the last. By the time I reached the elevator, my pulse was racing, not with panic, but with resolve. When the doors slid open, my breath caught. He was there. James. His dark coat draped over one arm, an umbrella in the other, his gaze steady as though he had been waiting all along. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. Then I nodded. Yes. The elevator carried us down, floor by floor, each ding pounding in my chest like a drumbeat of destiny. Outside, the storm lashed at the streets, but he opened the umbrella with a flick, its canopy a fragile sanctuary against the chaos. He extended his arm, and without thinking, I slipped my hand into the crook of his elbow. His car awaited at the curb, sleek and black, headlights slicing through the rain. The driver opened the door, and I slid inside, my thrift store coat a poor match for the leather seats and polished wood trim. He followed, settling across from me, his presence filling the space more than the storm ever could. "Don't worry about appearances," he said, catching the flicker of my self-consciousness. "Tonight is about vision, not wardrobe." I let his words soothe me, clutching the card in my pocket as if to remind myself this was real. The city blurred past the tinted windows, neon lights streaking across the glass like brushstrokes. My reflection merged with the towers outside, the dreamer and the visionary colliding in a single fleeting image. The car turned onto a winding drive, ancient oaks arching above us like guardians. The storm quieted here, the wind softening to a whisper. Then the gates appeared, wrought iron and gilded, swinging open to reveal what lay beyond. My breath caught. The estate rose before me, a sprawling palace of glass and granite, lit from within like a beacon. Water cascaded from a fountain in the courtyard, shimmering despite the rain. Columns soared, arches framed terraces, and every detail gleamed with deliberate magnificence. This was not just a house. It was a statement, a world apart from mine. The car stopped beneath a marble portico, and he stepped out first, offering his hand once again. My shoes clicked against the polished floor as I followed, my heart pounding. Every sketch I had ever drawn seemed to come alive. Here, carved into stone and glass. "Welcome," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of something more than hospitality. As the heavy doors opened and I stepped inside, chandeliers glittered overhead, dripping light like liquid stars. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished wood. I felt as though I had crossed a threshold not just into his estate, but into a future I could never have imagined for myself. The doors closed behind us, sealing out the storm, and his voice lowered to a murmur. "Tonight, you'll see the palace of possibilities." The words struck deeper than any promise, heavy with both temptation and warning. I pressed the card in my pocket, its edge digging into my palm, like a reminder. Once I walked further into these halls, there would be no turning back. And as the chandelier light shimmered across marble floors, I realized the truth. Desire had led me here, but doubt would decide if I could stay. The gates parted, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. Before me stretched a mansion of glass and steel, shimmering against the storm as though the elements themselves bent to its will. Frost clung to the windows like lace. Chandeliers glowed like captive stars, and I realized I was standing at the threshold of a world I had only ever drawn in dreams. The car rolled slowly up the sweeping drive, tires hissing on the rain-slicked stone. Each curve revealed another angle of the estate, facades of transparent walls, terraces framed by steel ribs, gardens glowing faintly despite the storm. My hands pressed against the cool glass of the car window, awe filling every inch of me. This wasn't just architecture. This was command. When the car stopped, James stepped out first, extending his hand to me. The marble beneath the portico gleamed like a mirror, reflecting both of us as we crossed into the grand entrance. My shoes clicked softly, the sound too small for the vastness that surrounded me. The doors opened, and warmth engulfed me. The foyer rose like a cathedral, ceilings soaring high above where crystal chandeliers dripped light in silver cascades. The marble floor stretched like an endless river, veins of black and gold threading through white stone. The storm's howl faded the instant the heavy doors closed, replaced by the hush of wealth and history. He offered his arm, and I slipped mine through it instinctively. Together, we moved down a corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling glass. Outside, the gardens blurred behind rain and frost, statues half buried in snow, lanterns glowing faintly as though guiding lost souls. My chest tightened. I had drawn this place before, in sketches no one had ever seen. Somehow, my private visions stood here, real and alive. Servants lined the hallway at intervals, their uniforms crisp, their gazes discreet, yet curious. Some bowed slightly, others simply observed. I caught the flicker of surprise in their eyes, surprise at me. A stranger in second-hand clothes, walking arm in, arm with the man who ruled this palace of glass. My cheeks flushed hot, but James's steady presence anchored me. At the end of the corridor, a small gathering awaited. Men and women in tailored suits, architects and executives, their hands clasped in patient anticipation. James's voice carried, strong and sure, as he introduced me. "Everyone, meet Ava Martin, my creative partner." Applause rippled through the hall, polite but genuine. I swallowed hard, dipping my head in acknowledgement, my heart thundering with disbelief. Partner. Not guest. Not visitor. Partner. He led me past the group, into a drawing room unlike any I had ever imagined. Its walls were lined with shelves, heavy with leather-bound portfolios and blueprint tubes. The air hummed with purpose, smelling faintly of parchment and ink. At the center, a long oak table stretched beneath soft golden lamps, its surface cleared except for a single steel panel embedded in the wall. James stepped forward, sliding the panel aside to reveal a recessed vault. My breath hitched. From within, he withdrew a stack of oversized blueprints, each sealed with the Carter crest. He spread them across the table, and my vision blurred with awe. The first sheet bore my name. My name, scrawled beside his in bold typeface, Martin and Carter, founders. Tears pricked my eyes as I traced the letters. My sketches, once fragile things scribbled in notebooks, were here transformed into crisp technical drawings. Towers soared, arches curved, gardens unfurled in perfect symmetry. Notes scrawled in the margins spoke of structural reinforcements, lighting optimization, heating systems, all details I never could have conceived on my own. Yet the soul of the designs was mine. James stood close, his voice low, steady. Your vision will guide every stone. My engineers will ensure it stands for centuries. Together, we will raise a palace that outlasts storms. I turned to him, trembling. This is everything I ever imagined. His eyes softened, pride and something deeper glinting in their depths. No, Ava, it's more. This is legacy. The storm thundered outside, shaking the glass panels, but inside the room, silence wrapped around us like a vow. My hands hovered over the blueprint, my pulse racing with both fear and exhilaration. Could I carry this weight? Could I live up to this trust? James placed a hand gently on mine, steadying it. We'll do this together, he said. The words should have comforted me. Instead, they filled me with the terrifying knowledge that once the first stone was laid, my life would never again be my own. As he sealed the vault once more, his words echoed in the hush. Tomorrow, we break ground. The room seemed to tremble with the enormity of it. Outside, lightning split the sky, reflecting against the glass walls like a warning. My chest tightened as I realized. This wasn't a dream anymore. This was real. And once the soil was turned, there would be no undoing it. The black leather folio snapped open with a sound that felt final, like the closing of a cell door. Inside, gilded words shimmered. Non-compete. Royalties. Intellectual property. Each clause gleamed like both a lifeline and a chain, promises of greatness etched in ink that could just as easily bind me forever. I sat frozen, the storm's muffled roar a distant hum beyond the glass walls. The folio lay open on the oak table, its parchment heavy, its letters sharp against the golden lamplight. James's hand rested lightly on the corner, his gaze fixed not on the words, but on me. This, he said softly, is how dreams take shape. My eyes scanned the first page. Exclusive creative rights. My pulse quickened. The words promised me resources beyond imagining, the chance to see my sketches bloom into stone and glass. Yet beside the promise was the price. Every idea, every flourish, every secret garden would belong not just to me, but to Carter Industries. My art, my very essence, cataloged into corporate archives. My throat tightened. So I'd be giving everything? I whispered. He leaned closer, his voice steady but gentle. Not giving, sharing, protecting. This ensures no one dilutes your vision, no one copies it, no one steals it. But the ink on the page still felt like surrender. The next section glinted in embossed letters. Royalties. My eyes widened at the numbers. Percentages of profits, shares of revenue from every facade, every fountain, every hall my designs touched. Enough to pay debts, to build security, to fund generations of dreams. Yet even as my heart leapt, unease curled in my stomach. Was success mine if every coin bore his empire's stamp? James's gaze softened as though reading my doubts. You'll never have to wonder if your work is valued, he murmured. This ensures you're rewarded for every stone laid. I turned the page with trembling fingers. Intellectual property. Dense paragraphs sprawled across the paper, absolute in tone. All concepts developed under this contract shall be the joint property of Carter Industries. My chest constricted. Joint property. My name would be there, but never alone. My creations would live, but never be wholly mine. I shut my eyes, overwhelmed by the duality. Each clause a gift, each gift a cage. The storm outside cracked with thunder, rattling the windows like a reminder that choices carry consequences. I opened my eyes to find James watching me, his expression unreadable, patience carved into his features. "I can't pretend this isn't heavy," I whispered. He reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. Warmth spread through me at the contact. "Ava," he said gently, "you asked me once why I came to your door. This is why. Not for sanctuary, not for tea. But because you see possibility where others see only cost. You saw me as human. I see you as extraordinary. And extraordinary requires commitment." His words seeped through my doubt, steady and sure, though the weight of the decision only deepened. My gaze fell again to the folio. I imagined my designs towering above cities, alive in stone and light. I imagined children running through my gardens, lovers strolling beneath moonlit arches. The thought sent a shiver of exhilaration through me. But then I imagined the chains, every blueprint stamped with Carter's crest, every idea tied to his empire. Would I be Ava, the dreamer, or Ava, the extension of his legacy? I rose from my chair, pacing the room. My footsteps echoed against marble, each one louder in the cavernous space. My mind spun with images of what I could build, and what I might lose. When I turned back, James hadn't moved. He simply watched me with quiet intensity, as though willing me to see the truth not in the contract, but in myself. "I need time," I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. He nodded once solemnly and closed the folio with a soft snap. The sound reverberated through the hush like a gavel's strike. He stood, slipping the leather case back into the vault. "Then take it," he said gently. "But know this: dawn won't wait forever." His footsteps echoed as he left me alone in the drawing room, the storm's fury muffled by the glass walls. I stared at the folio resting on the table, the Carter crest gleaming faintly, like an eye that never blinked. The storm eased to a whisper, mirroring the tremor in my heart. My fingers brushed the embossed leather, and I whispered into the silence, "Am I ready to pay the price of my dreams?" The air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my answer. Alone in my dim bedroom, the storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside me. Sticky notes littered every surface, pros in one corner, cons in another, yellow flags of indecision fluttering like desperate wings. Midnight ticked closer, and with it, the weight of a choice that could shatter or save me. I sat cross-legged on my sagging bed, staring at the chaos I had created. Notes covered my nightstand, dresser, even the floor. Security, resources, legacy written neatly on one side, while ownership, freedom, identity screamed back at me from the other. The room smelled faintly of ink and exhaustion, of candle wax burning low. On my nightstand, my phone blinked with an unread voice memo. My thumb hovered before I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the quiet, scratchy but strong. "Sweetheart, never doubt that you deserve every opportunity that comes your way. I've seen you struggle, but I've also seen your fire. Don't let fear chain you." Her words pressed against the ache in my chest. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting tears. All my life I had dreamed of more, and now more had come knocking, literally, in the form of a man I never should have met. My gaze drifted to the black folio lying open on my desk, its golden clauses gleaming like silent judges. The words blurred as memories crashed over me. The knock at my door, his trembling figure in the storm, the tea, the sketches, the moment he slid the signet ring onto my finger. All of it had led here. I rose, pacing the narrow space between my desk and the closet. My bare feet brushed against sticky notes on the floor, crinkling like dry leaves. What if I say yes and lose myself? What if I say no and lose everything I've ever wanted? The storm outside battered the window, rattling it so hard I thought it might break. My heart echoed the same rhythm. Fragile, desperate, demanding release. On the desk, my phone buzzed again. This time, a message flashed from an unknown number. Just one word. Decision. I froze, my breath catching. It was him, or someone sent by him. Either way, time was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in one hand, my mother's letter in the other. My chest felt like it would split open. I whispered into the air, "What do I want more? My freedom, or my chance?" I thought of the palace I had described, of the sketches I had made by candlelight, of children running through moonlit gardens I had drawn only in dreams. I thought of his eyes, tired, longing, yet burning with belief when he told me, "I could give you everything, if you'll trust me." Tears spilled down my cheeks. I lifted the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat, taunting me. Yes. No. My future balanced on 3 letters. The clock struck midnight. I inhaled sharply, steadying myself against the tremor in my hands. Fear screamed, but beneath it pulsed something stronger. Desire, not for wealth, but for creation. For the chance to see my visions built into stone and light. My thumb tapped. Yes. The word appeared on the glowing screen, stark and irreversible. I hit send. The air in the room shifted. The storm outside eased, its roar softening to a low murmur as though nature itself bowed to my choice. My chest heaved, equal parts relief and dread flooding through me. I had just tethered my life to his. Moments later, the phone vibrated again. His reply was short, almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. "Welcome aboard, partner." I pressed the device to my chest, eyes squeezed shut, whispering into the silence. God help me. The storm outside broke into silence, as if holding its breath for what I had just unleashed. My sticky notes fluttered to the floor, meaningless now. I stared at the phone in my hand, its message burning into me. Partner. The word tasted both sweet and terrifying. And as I lay back against my pillow, the ring on my finger cold against my skin, I knew my life had just split into before and after. Dawn was coming. And with it, the reckoning of everything I had just chosen. The sleek black car idled outside my building, its polished frame dusted with snow, headlights cutting through the dawn mist. Inside, a tailored coat and embroidered gloves lay waiting for me, as though I were about to step not into a vehicle, but into a new identity. My hands trembled as I pulled the door shut behind me. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and burnt coffee, the familiar scent of the life I was leaving behind. My thrift store coat felt suddenly thinner against the icy morning air. Yet when I spotted the car at the curb, I knew. This was no dream. The driver opened the back door with a crisp nod. "Ms. Martin," he said, his tone respectful. My breath caught at the sound. Ms. Martin, not Ava the barista, not Ava the tenant behind on rent. Ms. Martin, the woman stepping into destiny. Inside, warmth enveloped me. The leather seats gleamed, the faint scent of cedar and cologne hanging in the air. A velvet coat lay draped across the seat beside me, and a pair of gloves embroidered with golden thread. My pulse quickened. I touched the fabric tentatively, my fingers sinking into luxury I had never known. The other door opened, and James slid in, his presence commanding the space as effortlessly as it had filled my small living room. He offered a smile, softer than his usual steel-edged expression. "Put them on," he urged gently, nodding to the coat and gloves. My throat tightened as I obeyed. The velvet settled on my shoulders like armor, warm and impossibly soft. The gloves hugged my fingers, transforming me with their elegance. When I caught my reflection in the tinted window, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back looked confident, assured, a silhouette carved by possibility. "You look like who you're meant to be," James murmured, his eyes steady on mine. The car hummed to life, gliding through the quiet streets. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the windows, the city slowly stirring awake. James leaned forward, unfolding a slim folder on his lap. "Our first project," he said crisply. "The atrium. 6 weeks to groundbreaking. 12 to unveil. You'll be presented as co-visionary of Carter Industries." I repeated the title softly, tasting it on my tongue. Co-visionary. The words felt both foreign and powerful. He tapped the blueprint inside the folder, golden annotations marking every detail. Lighting design, material selection, structural flow. I want your touch in every decision. This is no longer my empire alone. It's ours. The weight of the statement pressed against my chest. Ours. As the car turned onto the main boulevard, the city skyline emerged, towers gleaming like guardians of a world I had only ever admired from afar. My reflection overlapped with them in the glass, as though I were already part of their story. We slowed before a towering edifice of glass and steel, Carter Industries headquarters. Its facade shimmered under the rising sun, a monument to ambition. My breath caught as the revolving doors spun open and the lobby lights glowed in welcome. Inside, the atrium was alive with murmurs. Executives, assistants, even reporters gathered in anticipation. Digital screens lit up with scrolling words. My heart stuttered when I saw my name flash across them. "Welcome, co-visionary Ava Martin." Applause broke out as we entered. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, faces turned toward me with curiosity and awe. My legs trembled, but James's steady hand at my back kept me moving forward. We ascended the steps to a raised dais, the board of directors waiting in a neat line. A microphone gleamed under the spotlights, and suddenly it was in my hand. The crowd hushed, expectation hanging in the air like lightning before a strike. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, but when I spoke, my voice carried clear and strong. "Good morning. I am Ava Martin, and today, I step into a dream made real. Together, we will build not just structures, but sanctuaries. Not just towers, but places where light, art, and life intertwine." The words poured from me, shaped by years of quiet longing. My fear ebbed with every sentence, replaced by fire. By the time I finished, the applause thundered through the atrium, echoing off the marble walls. James stepped beside me then, his pride unmistakable. He outlined the timeline, the budgets, the strategy, while I stood at his side, not as a shadow but as a partner. My gaze swept the crowd, and for the first time, I believed it. I belonged here. When the event ended, he led me through corridors humming with energy, staff pausing to offer congratulations, business cards pressed into my hand. Nods of respect followed me like a tide. I let it wash over me, dizzy but exhilarated. Finally, we reached the top floor. The executive suite spread wide, walls of glass framing the city skyline. The world stretched below us, glittering, alive, waiting. James poured 2 glasses of champagne, the bubbles rising like a promise. "To our future," he said. I lifted my glass, clinking it against his. "To our future." The words lingered on my tongue, sweeter than the champagne. But as I turned back to the window, watching the city sprawl like a canvas at my feet, unease whispered at the edges of my mind. Dreams this big always came with a price. James set his glass down, his voice low and steady. "Tomorrow," he said, "we lay the cornerstone." I stared at him, the weight of the moment pressing against my ribs. Tomorrow my vision would begin to take shape in stone, and with it, the final piece of my old life would crumble away. The spotlights blinded me as I stepped onto the stage, but it wasn't fear that made my knees tremble. It was the weight of every eye watching, waiting, judging. Cameras flashed like lightning, investors leaned forward in anticipation, and somewhere in the crowd, I swore I could hear the echo of my mother's voice telling me, "This is what you were meant for." The hall was vast, ceiling soaring so high it felt like the heavens themselves leaned in to listen. Rows of suited investors, Philanthropists in shimmering gowns and architects with reputations carved in stone filled the seats. The energy in the room buzzed like static before a storm, everyone hungry for revelation. I gripped the microphone, its metal cool and reassuring in my hand. Behind me, the giant screen blazed with our logo, Carter and Martin, Visionaries United. My name, my dream, illuminated in letters taller than I was. My pulse thundered in my ears, but when I spoke, the trembling in my voice steadied, carried by the conviction burning in my chest. "Good evening," I began, my words echoing across the hushed hall. "I stand before you not as a CEO, not as a legacy, but as a dreamer who believes that spaces can be more than walls and roofs. They can be sanctuaries. They can be stories. They can be hope." The audience leaned in, their collective breath drawn. On the screen, renderings of my designs appeared, moonlit gardens suspended over courtyards, crystalline atriums refracting dawn into rainbow hues, pathways of glass arcing across cityscapes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, gasps rising as my visions unfolded in living color. I felt my nerves dissolve into fire. Each word became easier, stronger, born from years of sketching in candlelight and hoping for more. Imagine walking into a hall where sunlight cascades through marble columns like liquid gold. Imagine terraces blooming with flowers that breathe with the rhythm of the seasons. Imagine a city where beauty isn't reserved for the privileged, but shared with every passerby. Applause broke like a wave, rolling through the hall before subsiding into rapt silence again. My chest expanded, my eyes burned with tears I refused to shed. This was no longer a dream whispered to myself in lonely nights. This was real. Then James stepped forward, his figure commanding in the spotlight. His voice was steady, authoritative, yet tinged with warmth as he picked up where I left off. "Together, Ava Martin and I will begin a new chapter. We are not simply building structures, we are building legacies, sustainable, breathtaking, unforgettable legacies." He outlined the strategy with ease: budgets, timelines, global partnerships, his corporate polish complementing my raw passion. The synergy between us filled the hall like a symphony, art and strategy, heart and steel. When he finished, the applause erupted with thunderous force. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, cameras flashing in relentless staccato. For a moment, the world blurred, sound and light overwhelming me until all I could feel was James's steady presence beside me, his pride anchoring me in the storm of adoration. Backstage, my legs finally gave way. I collapsed into a velvet chair, clutching the microphone like a lifeline. James appeared beside me, offering a glass of water with a small smile. "You were brilliant," he said, voice low and certain. I laughed shakily, tears threatening now. "We were brilliant." He sat beside me, his hand brushing mine as though grounding me. "Do you know what tonight was?" he asked. I shook my head, still dazed. He leaned closer. It was the moment we stopped dreaming and started forging. As if on cue, his assistant entered, carrying a small velvet box. James opened it, and inside lay 2 embossed business cards. One bore his familiar title, James Carter, CEO, Carter Industries. The other was new, pristine, gleaming under the soft backstage lights. Ava Martin, co-visionary, Carter and Martin. My breath hitched. He held the card out to me like a vow. My fingers trembled as I took it, the cardstock thick and smooth against my palm. For years, I had scribbled my name in sketchbooks, signed my initials in the margins of blueprints no one else would ever see. Now my name was etched into history beside his. I pressed the card to my chest, overwhelmed. James's eyes softened, pride flickering with something deeper, unspoken. "Welcome to the board," he whispered. The words wrapped around me like a mantle, heavy and glorious all at once. As we stepped out of the backstage glow, the roar of applause still echoing, I knew the world had changed. The card in my hand burned with promise, but it also carried a weight I hadn't yet reckoned with. The lobby doors opened, spilling us into the star-strewn night. The horizon stretched vast and uncharted before us. James's hand brushed mine as he murmured, "This is only the beginning." And though exhilaration surged through me, a shiver whispered along my spine. Beginnings are powerful, but they also demand everything. Thunder rolled like applause across the sky, rain hammering against the glass walls of our new office. Inside, the storm sounded less like chaos and more like a drumbeat, steady, inevitable, heralding transformation. For the first time, I felt both exhilarated and anchored, as if destiny itself had taken a seat at our oak table. The office towered above the city, its floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a skyline blurred by sheets of rain. Skyscrapers melted into ghostly outlines. Streets shimmered like rivers of silver. Yet here, in this cocoon of glass and steel, the storm felt distant, muffled by ambition. James and I sat side by side at a long oak table, cluttered with steaming mugs, sketchbooks, and glowing tablets. Across the screen, our first official proposal scrolled in bold letters. Project Horizon, a legacy of light and life. My fingers traced the embossed title on my new business card. Co-founder and creative director Ava Martin. The weight of the card steadied me. Only weeks ago, I had been sketching by candlelight, worrying over rent. Now, I was shaping cities. James leaned closer, his voice steady but charged. 3 months for design refinements, 2 months for stakeholder workshops, and groundbreaking the first week of spring. His pen moved in precise strokes, sketching timelines with military precision. I countered with ideas of my own, weather-reactive installations, gardens that whispered with soundscapes of nature, glass, walls that shifted hues with the sunrise. He nodded, adjusting structural calculations, weaving practicality into my visions. Our dialogue was a dance, his logic balancing my creativity, my passion fueling his strategy. At one point I laughed softly, sketching a hidden café in the atrium. A place for artists to sip coffee and leave their sketches behind, tucked into the architecture itself. James's eyes crinkled with delight. And above it, we'll suspend a glass gallery, walkways spiraling like ribbons, so every visitor sees the atrium from heaven's height. The storm rumbled approval outside, lightning flashing like applause against the window panes. As hours passed, our proposal transformed into more than blueprints. It became a manifesto, a promise that beauty and ambition could coexist, that structures could embody compassion as much as power. Every annotation, every detail hummed with possibility. Finally I rose, stretching sore muscles. I wandered to the window, rain streaming down the glass like tears from a sky unwilling to let go. Below, the city pulsed, alive and unknowing of what we were about to unleash. James joined me, draping a shawl across my shoulders. His touch lingered, his voice softer now. "Look at what we've begun." I pressed my palm to the cool glass, whispering, "It's more than I ever dreamed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 cards. One bore his familiar title, the other mine. He slid it into my hand with deliberate care, his gaze holding mine. "This is your legacy now as much as mine." My fingers trembled as I clutched it. I thought of my mother, of her voice reminding me to never doubt. I thought of the stormy night when a stranger had knocked on my door and asked for tea. And I thought of every sacrifice, every tear, every sketch that had carried me here. The rain's rhythm softened, thunder fading into a low hum. Dawn crept across the horizon, silver threads weaving through retreating clouds. Light spilled across the city, fragile but unrelenting. I turned back to James, my heart steady now. "Rain or shine," I whispered, "we build." He smiled, pride and promise etched into his expression. "Rain or shine," he echoed. As thunder rolled one last time, I realized storms would come again, not of rain, but of doubt, of power, of ambition tested. And yet, standing here with him, I felt ready. James leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. "Ready for our next storm?" he asked softly. I met his gaze, loyalty and excitement sparking like lightning in my chest. "Always," I whispered back. Together, we turned from the window, stepping into the dawn. Rain or shine, storms or sunlight, we were bound by every blueprint, every heartbeat, and every choice yet to come. If this journey from a rain-soaked chance meeting to building palaces ignited your imagination, hit the button and let me know which moment surprised you most. Subscribe and ring the EI bell so you don't miss the next chapter of our story. There's more storms, more dreams, and more magic ahead. Comment below with your own "Would you dare" moment and share this video with friends who love unforgettable twists. Your support powers every brick, every blueprint, and every dream we bring to life. Thank you for being part of our vision.